But what it meant is I was letting go of all the things that I was holding on to. Okay, I was freeing the captives. You know that there's a scripture where Jesus went into hell before he ascended into heaven after his crucifixion, and he was freeing all the captives from hell. And that's the symbolism of that. Is the captives are all of the things that you're holding on to and you've buried in your subconscious. Some of them you don't even remember. And those things are affecting your life. They're affecting your reality that you're creating now. And we're in the process of a great awakening on this planet where we're trying to remember who and what we are. But we also chose to come here to experience what we're not, so that we could fully understand and appreciate who and what we are. So by remembering who you are, you can heal yourself, you can eliminate a lot of this stuff that goes on in your life that you feel like, just happens for no reason. Nothing happens for no reason, my friends. Hello, my friends. I want to talk about something that I think is really important for humanity and for us as individuals and so on. If you read the title, you probably know what I'm going to talk about, but I want to start out with a quote that I love that is attributed to the Buddha. And it goes like this. It goes, if you hang on to anger, it's like drinking poison and hoping the other guy dies. Okay? And so I think, and I've always loved that quote because it just, it resonates with me. It makes so much sense. Because when we're angry with somebody, it's usually because of resentment. And if we're holding a grudge, it's because of resentment and so on. And we think that we are punishing the other person somehow, and we're not. We are punishing ourselves, my friends. So that quote makes perfect sense. But not only that, is that limits your spiritual evolution too. When you hold on to anger and resentment and hold a grudge over things, that limits it anchors you to the 3D world and limits your ability to move forward, not only spiritually, but in many ways and so on. And we all know people who probably have somebody that they're angry at, and they've said I'll never forgive that person for what they did to me. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Or maybe some of you have felt that way. And I guess you feel like that if you forgive them, they're getting away with something. But you're only hurting yourself. You're only punishing yourself for what you think they did to you, or what you feel that they did to you. And I'm not saying maybe they did do something egregious to you, and you had a right to be angry. It's okay to get angry and to sit in that anger and feel that anger, but don't hang on to it. Some people do that, go through their whole lives, especially with family members sometimes, And I'm not discounting what people that have had something traumatic happen to them, that somebody did something traumatic to them. I'm not discounting that at all. You have a right to be angry and to be upset about that. And you feel, what's the word? It's an affront to you that somebody would do that to you, especially if it's a loved one, right? And so, and I've already mentioned it, but the key obviously is forgiveness. And everybody says, not everybody, I shouldn't say everybody. People think, well, if I forgive them, then they get away with it. It's like, I got news for you, my friends. They already got away with it. And that's why you're angry about it or upset about it. And some things people do, it's, you should be angry about it. But don't dwell there. Don't stay there. And so that's the way to move forward in your life, is to let go of all those hurts. I am aware of a situation of somebody who, I don't want to reveal too much because I don't want anybody to know who I'm talking about, but anybody that knows me. But they had a situation where there was money involved, like years ago, and there was a case, and the person had a whole bunch of interest accruing over time, but then it got settled years ago, actually. It kind of went on for years, and then it got settled years ago, and then all of a sudden it got reopened. According to a certain state's laws, they can do that, supposedly. So anyways, but it was initiated by the other person who doesn't need the money for any reason. They're just trying to punish. And so, and the person they're trying to punish is struggling financially. And so it just struck me as, man, how petty can you be? Especially the one who initiated it is actually pretty well off. So, anyways, so the only logical conclusion you could come to is that it's a punishment. And so that's a little bit different, I guess, than, well, I mean, still that's holding a grudge and resentment for how many years? It's probably been 25 or 30 years for the whole thing. That's just one example, and there's all kinds of examples like that. I'm sure you could think of examples like that, or you might have something like that. So if you're holding a grudge like that against somebody, stop drinking the poison, my friends. Seriously, because it's holding you back and it's keeping you in a place that you don't want to be. The other thing is that we are creators, okay? And so we create what Darius J. Wright calls dimensional space here and on the other side. And so we're creating our life around us. So if you're stuck in anger, resentment, and holding a grudge, you're stuck in a feedback loop where the universe, or God, if you will, is going to give you more of that, because that's your frequency or your vibration. So you're attracting, if you will, although it's not really an attraction, but you're entering into that dimensional state, okay, where there's more of that stuff, because that's what you're vibrating at. That's the frequency you're vibrating of it. I know that sounds kind of new agey, but it's true. Everything is a vibration. Everything is energy. We're all energy. And so you have to let go of that stuff. And I get it. It's not easy, especially if somebody has done something especially egregious to you, something very traumatic and harmed you physically, but also mentally, emotionally, and so on. It can be very hard to let go of that. I had a dream once where I was on this island. I don't know if I've told this before or not. And anyways, there were these like catacombs and or a prison, if you will, on this island. And I was being asked to go down and let them all out. And I was like, no, I can't do that, because then they're going to get to the mainland. And, it was almost like a Walking Dead show or something. They're going to get to the mainland and terrorize everybody on the mainland. And anyways, to make a long story short, what happened was, in the dream, I went up onto this house on the island that was higher, and I said, no, you can't come up here. And backing up a little bit, I let them out. I went and let all the prisoners out. I freed all the prisoners. But then I didn't want them to come up to the house where I was. And then when I did, they all floated up into, I finally gave in. And when I did that, they all came up to the house, and then they floated up into the light and like disappeared into the light. And so that's the nutshell version of it. But what it meant is I was letting go of all the things that I was holding on to. Okay. I was freeing the captives. That there's a scripture where Jesus went into hell before he ascended into heaven after his crucifixion, and he was freeing all the captives from hell. And that's the symbolism of that, is the captives are all of the things that you're holding on to and you've buried in your subconscious. Some of them you don't even remember. And those things are affecting your life. They're affecting your reality that you're creating now. And some people wonder why they seem to just keep walking into one bad situation after another. Well, take a look at where your thoughts and your energy are most of the time. If you're holding grudges, if you get angry a lot at people, and you're trying to control people, that they should be doing things your way, that kind of stuff. And we all have done that to some degree or another, and some of us more than others, unfortunately. But you keep getting more of that, because that's the wavelength that you're on. That's the timeline, so to speak, if you will, that you're living in, because it's matching your frequency. Your frequency is matching that timeline, I should say. So, and another thing is that when you do get angry, it releases like this chemical cocktail of negative hormones that wreak havoc on your body over time. Maybe not immediately, but I believe that this is where cancers and disease come from. Not that environmental circumstances don't have anything to do with it. But I think that, you know, the body is susceptible to it if you live in anger and fear and resentment and grudgingly and so on and so forth, because you're constantly releasing those chemicals. That's why one person can be in the same environment and not have any problems, not get any diseases, and another person, can get cancer or something like that. So I think that the root cause of all disease or dis-ease is emotional, mental, and spiritual. If you're not following your life path and you get off track and you're living in fear and you're living in resentment and you want vengeance, you're off your life path, I can guarantee you. And eventually that will manifest in the body some way or another. But it's already manifesting in your life, especially if you're one of these folks who feel like you just keep stepping into one bad situation after another. You've got to change your thinking. You've got to learn to let it go. Just let it go, my friends. I know that sounds simple, and it is kind of an oversimplification because we have all of these subconscious stuff going on that got programmed into us when we were a kid, used most of it before we were 7 years old. And we're in the process of a great awakening on this planet where we're trying to remember who and what we are. But we also chose to come here to experience what we're not, so that we could fully understand and appreciate who and what we are. So by remembering who you are, you can heal yourself, you can eliminate a lot of this stuff that goes on in your life that you feel like, just happens for no reason. Nothing happens for no reason, my friends. And I get it. I too wonder sometimes, like, why did that just happen? I'm trying to be good, or whatever you want to call it. And that's the other thing you can do, is try too hard. And I've mentioned that before. But one of the things that I try to do to mitigate this kind of stuff, when somebody does something that angers me, and or I harbor some resentment for some past thing that kind of creeps up, I try to ask myself, what would love do? And I think I've mentioned that before too. So what would love do? A lot of Christians go around and say, well, what would Jesus do? Well, if you're a Christian or you have that background, like I came from that background, the scriptures say that God is love, and most Christians believe that Jesus is God. That's a whole nother rabbit hole, and if you've listened to any of my other videos, you know what my feelings are about all of that. So, but the name Jesus Christ is a powerful name because a lot of people have certain beliefs and thought forms built around it, and so it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. But anyways, so if God is love, then Jesus, you could replace the name Jesus with love if you want to. The scriptures are all a metaphor, in my opinion, and that's the true teachings of the scriptures, is the metaphor. Now, that doesn't mean there's not some historical context to some of it, but the more important thing, in my opinion, is that the metaphor for it, and like freeing the captives, And then there's another scripture that says that a person's enemies at some point will be those of their own household. And a lot of people who take the scriptures so literally think that means, like family and spouses and brothers and sisters and so on. And that can be, but what it really means, the deeper meaning, I should say, is the things that you're holding on to, the stories that you're telling yourself, the resentments, the grudges, and so on. That's the real enemies of your own household, because your household is you, your body, your mind, your spirit. So anyways, my friends, that is what I wanted to get off my chest today. And I hope that this actually helps somebody. Stop drinking the poison, my friends, and let yourself relax. Resign as general manager of the universe, and you have a lot calmer life. Stop trying to control people. Stop holding resentment if somebody does something you don't like about them. Let them go. Let them be who they are. That doesn't mean you have to let somebody harm you, but even if they do, you can't hold on to that, because that's drinking poison and hoping the other person gets punished. And it doesn't work that way. You're just punishing yourself. So, all right, my friends, I'm going to cut this one short and leave it at that. And I hope everybody has a great day. Stop drinking the poison, my friends.